Hello there, friends and enemies. Today we are doing something a little bit different and actually filming, though within reason, so that I can show off today's product, which is Phantoms, the Rise of Deathrock from the LA punk scene by Mikey Bean, edited by him rather. Now there may be some confusion. Why am I talking about a music scene from LA, which in this case stands for Los Angeles in California in the United States, when I usually talk about things specifically from Latin America? I was thinking of all sorts of excuses that I could potentially use. Like, for example, there are a few Latino people in this book. Or, it's in California, which used to be part of Mexico way back in the day. But ultimately, the reason I'm going to give is my channel. I do what I want. I bend the rules when I want. Anyways. And basically, I just think this is an important book for GothTube, or DeathrockTube, perhaps. That doesn't sound as good, but hey, it should be a thing, right? So what this book is, as the title indicates, it's about the history of Deathrock. But what about the history of Deathrock? Well, it is an oral history, so it's put together a bunch of interviews and conversations between various musicians and people somehow connected to the scene, all put together by Mikey Bean and arranged in a way that makes sort of sense. It's not chronological, in case any of you are wondering. It's sort of clumped. Each chapter has a few different bands that it mostly covers. So, there are times where it sort of goes back and forth a bit. It's not the most comparable book I've seen is Please Kill Me, the unauthorized oral history of punk, which I read in 11th grade for an essay I wrote about punk for my American history class, which, yes, I got an A on, but also that teacher was retiring that year, so who knows if it was actually quality. But that book, if you've read it, is chronological. This one is not until the very end. Because the last chapter is sort of a where is the scene now type of retrospective sort of thing. Whereas everything else is just like, hey, here's Nervous Gender and the Descendants, and here, or Decadence, and here's Eva O, here's 45 Grave, here's Christian Death. There's actually a few chapters that touch on Christian Death because Christian Death and Roz Williams were so intricately connected to the scene. And as you can see, it's pretty long. It is, I believe, 611 pages. That's just like the sections that are actually the chapters. There's also an introduction, and there's also a part that tells you, like, these are who all the people who you see talk are, which is very helpful because, even if you know these bands, if you don't know all of them or, don't know every single member of every band, you can go back and check, like, okay, who is Gary Allen? Who is Jimmy Bemis? And that was very helpful to me because I don't know every single member of every single band, and I didn't actually know all the bands that they were talking about because it's pretty in-depth. And yeah, look at 2 columns. It's pretty long. But I finished it because I wanted to finish it before I did a review, but you don't actually have to finish it. It's not like, or if you skip a chapter, because something will say a lot is like, oh, see chapter 4 for more information. And if you do skip to whatever chapter or skip backwards, it's not like you're going to miss out if you skip, because like I said, it's not chronological. But that is what I chose to do, and probably what most people will choose to do. And it took me about a month to read because I got it at the end of December, or maybe it arrived in early January, and I finished reading it in early February. And the only reason I was able to read it so much is partly because I had a trip in there where I was on the Greyhound for several hours and I needed something to read. That's part of why it looks a little ratty on these corners, because I had it in my bag when I was traveling and I took it with me to work, read it on breaks, that sort of thing. Whereas some people, it might take much longer. Some people, it might take much faster. But anyways, so basically, it's a very conversational style book. It talks about each individual band as much as it can. And something that I thought was really interesting is, because like I said, it's about Deathrock, which even though nowadays Deathrock has kind of been eaten up by the goth scene. And the way people define it, death rock music specifically, is like, oh, it's that music that's kind of rockabilly-ish sounding, but horror-ish and punkish. It didn't really have a specific sound in the beginning. It was literally just the name of the scene, and there were some bands that are considered part of the death rock movement that we, by modern standards, would not consider having that so-called death rock sound. And it also really emphasized how much death rock is not goth originally. Like, yes, the two were darkly inclined subcultures, and they definitely combined. But, the artists were not inspired by previous goth musicians. Many of them really did not consider themselves to be a part of the goth scene, because goth was not a word that was used. Heck, death rock wasn't even a word that was used initially. And even when goth became a thing people were familiar with, a lot of them considered the scene to be different, even though there was, at that point, a lot of combining of the scenes, and, they performed with some of the same artists when they toured and all that. Because, not just did it start in a different place, not only were they not inspired by those artists, but they were inspired by different things, including some things that a lot of internet goths would be like, oh, no goth would ever like that thing. For example, a lot of them, like Eva O always talks about how she's, inspired by Ozzy Osbourne and Led Zeppelin, which aren't really thought of as inspirational to goths, but they were in a lot of ways inspirational to some death rockers. And, it's kind of funny seeing these discussions about, no true goth would ever do that, like things that are thought of as not goth things. That's what people assume goths would do. A lot of death rockers did those things precisely, like a lot of sort of shock value stuff. Death rockers were very into shock value, and the use of sort of blasphemous or even satanic imagery, which, like, how could anyone ever think a goth is a Satanist? Well, there were some Satanists in the death rock movement, or people who were at least using satanic imagery for whatever reason. And, that's just what people did. I suppose to keep my channel child-friendly, I need to provide all the warnings. Lots of profanity in this book. Mentions of drug use, mentions of sex, mentions of suicide and other unfortunate deaths, and mentions of performance art using roadkill. Don't do that, children. It's very unsanitary. Don't do what these people do. Or, make a band, but don't do all the same things that they do. There are some bad decisions made, and they acknowledge it. It's not like they portray it as like, oh, that was an awesome decision we made. It was like, oh, that kind of led to some bad things. Because especially the death rock movement, people think everyone who's famous is rich. And for a lot of these people, that is not the case. A lot of them, the people are not even bands anymore. Several of them are just living normal lives now. And, even the ones that are in bands, because the big launch of this book, which was last weekend, which is where I got sick, probably why I'm putting this out a lot later than I wanted to, some of the bands were there, and I know a lot of random people who semi-know these people. They're not living in mansions, they're living in regular houses. That's actually, something that's sort of covered is in the part about 45 Grave. It talks about how one of their songs was in one of the Night of the Living Dead movies, and whenever that movie gets shown somewhere, all of a sudden they'll get popular there, and they'll travel there, and they talked about traveling to these places and not really having the money to just throw down and do that, but doing it anyways. So I think that this shows another side of fame. It's like fame without the fortune, which I think is an interesting perspective to see. That I think, we don't see that enough. We've seen fortune without the fame. We've seen fame and fortune, but not fame without the fortune, which is for a lot of alternative people kind of what you get, I think. And one chapter that I think is really interesting that stands out, like, let's just say, you aren't able to buy this book, someone who has it, you want to speed read one chapter while you're waiting for them as they're getting ready in the bathroom. I would recommend chapter 10, because that chapter is actually about the inspirations behind Deathrock. It's about interests a lot of them had in terms of music, in terms of random other things, that, aesthetics, just random things. Because, even though it's a music-based subculture, in any given subculture, regardless of what the big thing is, even whether it's a fashion-based subculture, whatever, usually there are common interests behind the members that aren't necessarily the thing that is the main thing. Like, a lot of them said, oh, I liked these movies or whatever. And there's actually sort of a brief discussion of the tie between like Disney and dark subcultures in Southern California, which I think is very cool, of course. I've been to 6 different Bats Days, so obviously that's something I know a lot about. And, like I said, this is quite a long book. It's not dense, but I know that not everybody wants to read it, but I recommend it. Like, if it takes you a few years because you're busy, then I think it would be worth it. However, I also know that not everybody is able to do that. But I hope you are, if you're someone who's interested in this subject, which, I feel like if you are that interested in this particular subject, you probably will make the time and effort, whether it's I have to take a few years to read this because I'm busy all the time, or hey, I'm going on a road trip. Whenever I'm not driving, I'll be the one reading this in the back, Because I could really see this in the future being sort of, at least chapters of it being almost taught in a history of rock class or history of, alternative subcultures class, something you do actually learn about in certain subjects if you pick your majors right. Because it is incredibly informative. One thing that it may be disappointing to some of you, I love, is that it actually disproved a lot of the claims that you see on the internet just presented as facts about these bands, and I think a lot of you will like that, because a lot of you like, tearing down the wiki goths, wiki deathrockers, if you may. So, I have to show you this really fast. Look, see, I went to the book signing, author signed my book. I doubt he remembers me, but he signed it. And below I will include the link to where you can buy it. It is about $33 plus shipping wherever you live. That may be more or less, because I believe it's coming from the UK. No, it's coming from New York. Sorry, the author is from the UK, and there is some Britishy spelling, which maybe seems really interesting to some of you. Because it's like, why would a British guy be interested in a American subculture? But, a lot of Americans are interested in Goth, which is technically originally a British subculture, so no one thinks that's weird. But ultimately, yeah, I recommend it. It's nice seeing something about Deathrock being the thing that's, examined, especially. And it was significant to me specifically because I'm actually from this area where it takes place, and actually seeing people who are not just from the area but have been to the same places as me, it literally makes reference to the city that I am from, which some of you know which one I'm from specifically. And so if you are from the same area as me, maybe that'll be cool and special to you. But even if you aren't, you could be from somewhere totally other side of the world. I'm sure you could still find this interesting. If I had tons of money, I would buy up a bunch of copies and send this out to all of the goth tubers who I think were interested, but I don't. So all I can do is say, hey, if you're interested and you want to, you should buy this book online. And if you're not interested, I'm surprised that you've watched this video this long. Till next time, bye now.